Math is a model of reality. If that model, the mathematical model, is not congruent with actual reality, then math has to figure that out. For example, divide by zero being undefined. How can divide by zero be undefined? How is that model actually accurate to reality? Well, Butters here is going to help us out. I will now divide Butters by zero in actual reality. Nothing happened. How is that undefined? There's a problem with their mathematical model. Just for fun, I'm now going to divide Butters by 1. Sorry, Butters, the 1's a little bit more unpleasant than 0, I guess. I mean, again, nothing happened. Now let's divide Butters by 2. Not doing that, no. And again, the reason I'm not going to divide Butters by 2 my finger was in there, should prove the point I'm making. The mathematical model is a model of reality. If that model of reality is not congruent with reality, we have to fix our model or update, evolve, whatever verbiage you want to use. Our model needs to change to be congruent with reality. And I've been getting more and more on this page of divide by zero equals undefined just doesn't make sense because it doesn't correlate with anything you can model in reality. I mean, yeah, it's a little bit of a weird, absurd thing to be like, I'm going to divide my cat by 0. But that's kind of what I'm getting at. And that's kind of why I get partly how 0 being undefined came about. There's a lot to that. That's not what we're here to talk about. What we're here to talk about is our model needs to be congruent with reality. So when I divide Butters by 0, sorry, Butters, that's no change. That's not nothing. That's not undefined. That's no change. Nothing changed. Nothing happened. I think we actually need multiple zeros or multiple forms of 0. Like, we need something that is kind of equivalent to undefined in a sense, but in like a way that actually makes sense compared to trying to say it's undefined. And I think we need a 0 that says nothing changed, nothing happened. And I think we need a 0 that is more representative or a symbol for kind of the silly idea and debate 0 gets into, where it's like, well, 0 means nothing. And then people get into this silliness of like, well, 0 means absolutely nothing of anything. It's like, that's absurd. And then we get into this stuff where people are like, but you can't really have 0 because there's still electromagnetic radiations and particles in the vacuum of space. It's like, how did you get to that absurdity? That's not what 0 means. 0 means there's none of that thing in that context. So, I mean, Butters is here. I'm not going to 0 him out or anything, obviously, but I have a remote control. If it leaves the frame, we'll say it doesn't exist anymore for the sake of this example. I have 1 remote control. I have 0 remote controls. That doesn't mean there's nothing. It means in the context of this, that thing is now none. Not nothing. Not like an absolute nothing at all. And it's like that thing bothered me so much in school when they were teaching math, and I didn't really have any framework or anything to express why it bothered me and what was like I was never really willing to accept it, but I understand it's like, that's how our systems work, so I have to do it that way, even if I think it's silly. I can't just go do math different and then that's just silly. Even if I think the model is wrong, I still have to go with what the model is until it changes. So I'm not going to go around trying to do math that's not accepted and in silly ways. Anyways, that's a bit of a sidetrack, but probably worth saying. Anyways, the point I was trying to get to is that, oops, dropped it. Oops. Anyways, I might need to re-record this a little bit or whatever. Anyways, what I'm getting at is 0 doesn't mean nothing the way people get silly about it. It means none of that thing in that context, the way we normally use it, which still makes dividing by 0 undefined silly. But it's like we're silly about 0 in the basics of how we talk about it in the context of our mathematical models. If we just casually like zero the thing, no one's going to get weird about it. But then you get into like zero undefined and the oops, I did it again.
Getting into the bullshit.
I keep on pausing it my show because I'm screwing with my NVIDIA remote, which is anyways, back to the point. Zero of this remote means there's just none of that remote. It doesn't mean an absolute absence of everything or absolutely nothing. Zero doesn't mean the vacuum of frickin' space. But we get into this silliness when we start talking about stuff like dividing by zero, where it's like, what do you mean? How do we get into that silliness? When if we reframe everything as what it really is that math is a model of reality. Math is not reality. It's a way to model reality. I have one remote. One remote is in my hand right now. That is reality. You can express this reality with a mathematical model. I can say, I have one cat that has 4 paws, 1 tail, 2 ears, and 2 eyes. That, you can see that right now, right here. That is reality. But if I do a mathematical model to describe what I just said about Butters, that's not reality. That's a model of reality. And these models of reality need to be congruent with actual reality. So if I say I divide Butters by 0, he's not undefined. Just nothing happens. Because, I mean, you can't really divide by 0. I mean, that it does get a little bit squirrely if we really get into it, because you can't really literally divide by 0. But then again, you can't really literally divide by 1. Like, that doesn't really work. Like, let's divide Butters by 1. It doesn't really flange. But it also does, and that's where it does go a little bit squirrely and whatnot, and that's... But I feel like that just feeds back into the point I'm trying to make, is that, you know, you can't really literally divide by 1, but if you're like, I will divide Butters by 1, our mathematical model actually models that properly. It says anything divided by 1 is what it was originally. Because, like, yeah. Same with, like, if you multiply by 1. A multiplication actually might help this a little bit. And it's the same thing with division, is like you go back to some of the basic ways, the most fundamental ways they taught multiplication and division is 2 by 2 is combining 2 groups of 2. 2 times 8 is a similar kind of thing. And similar with division, where it's like, it's, you know, if you want to get into it, it's like playing with groupings, kind of, if you want to get into like the fundamentals of like how they originally, at least how I was originally taught it in elementary school and all that, is like, it was like, you know, they used a model of like, you know, when you do 2 times 2, it's 2 groups of 2 and you combine those groups. And same with division. Well, I have Butters. I divide Butters into a group of 1. He's kind of already there, so nothing changes. But I divide Butters into a group of 0. He might just run off into the balcony, so he might help me out with that in a sense. But yeah, I turn Butters into a group of 0. If I phrase it like that, that would imply the answer should actually be 0. Because then the way I said it there is I'm placing Butters into a group of 0. That means no groups, there's no nothing, that should be a 0. But if we say it in a context where it's like, I divide by 0 and just nothing changed, that's a different thing. And I think that's why we need multiple zeros, because there's a difference between having a 0 that's nothing changed and having a 0 that's none of that thing. And that's the thing. I divide by Butters by 0. Oh, he wants to play. Okay, he wants to divide me by 0 now. Oh, yeah. Anyways, I kind of ranted on about this. I'll probably still post this, but I feel like I want to do a more concise version of this at some point in the future. But yeah, Oh, mathematicians are probably going to be like, burr, 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 burr. And I fully expect that. And that's like, I'm trying to figure out how to talk about this in a way to like break past like the barrier I run into trying to talk to people about this, where they're like, burr, 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 burr. And I'm like, and I try to be like, let's get back to the core. What is math? Math is a model of reality, and that model needs to accurately reflect the reality it's supposed to be modeling. Dividing by zero is not undefined. There's nothing undefined. Unless you get into like silly, weird, crappy linguistic territory where like, oh, Butters, see, he divided by zero in the sense that now there is no Butters. Just, he left the frame. He still exists. But in the context of our model is the amount is what's in the frame of this camera. So now we have 1. Now we subtract 1, and it is 0. I'm not going to divide my remote by 2. I would prefer it to be in one piece. But that's the thing, is like, if I divide that remote by 2, that would mean I am cutting it exactly in half. And we can quibble over like volume versus mass or whatever, but that would be getting silly. If we say I divide this by 2, I cut it in half. I make 2 groups out of the one original thing. If you divide by 0, you make 0 groups out of the one original thing. If that's the 0 you meant. So it's like, which 0 do you mean? Do you mean it didn't change? Or do you mean this is now grouped into nothing? As in like 0 groups. So is divide by 0 groups? Which means now the thing, you can't have the thing if there's no groups. It has to at least be in its own group. So no groups implies no thing. And no thing, although that's literally nothing in a sense, is just the thing is not there. Not actually true, literal, there's absolutely nothing. Anyways, I ranted on too long. Hopefully this like physical modeling and like actually having a visual, like, this is what I mean. I say divide by 2, that model means this gets cut in 2 exactly equally, which again, there is going to be a breakdown between the model and actual reality no matter what. The model cannot perfectly model reality, and that's something I should have addressed sooner. Is that's also something we have to hold in, is no matter what, our models will never be 100% perfect. That's why we always have to be open to refining them and updating them and making them better when we figure out new stuff and think about stuff in new ways.